Hey guys, welcome back to a brand new video, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the 2022 midterm elections and the polling data that we're currently looking at, and then we'll be comparing it to some other midterm elections in the past that have been favorable for the Republican Party. So we're going to start off, get right into it by looking at the 2010 U.S. House of Representatives elections. We can also look at the Senate elections too, but I think that the House is a bit more telling of where the country is as a whole, mostly because Senate races are much less partisan than House races. And I say that mostly because, House races are, when you add up the vote totals of House races, you generally get an electorate that is very similar to what you saw in the presidential race. So in 2020, what that means, I guess, is in 2020, Joe Biden won the popular vote by about 4%, a little over 4%. Over Donald Trump, and House Democrats won the popular vote over House Republicans by about 3%. So they were fairly correlated. Biden did a little better than House Democrats, but they were quite correlated, and they were, still close together. In 2018, the Democrats won the House popular vote by like 8.6%. In 2016, there was a bit of a crossover. Trump lost the popular vote by 2%, but House Republicans won the popular vote by just under a point, I believe. So, there was a bit of a crossover, but it was only by 3%. Now, in 2010, the GOP flipped the House, as you can see by all the red on this map, and they won the House, as you can see by, the environment that they were in. They won it by 6.8%. So it was quite a good environment for them, and they did very, very well. Now, just to take a look at the Senate elections, just because I think we should bring them up, they were good for Republicans. They didn't take back the Senate, because as you can see here, they gained 6 seats, but they went, and the two independents are Angus King and Bernie Sanders, so they're basically Democrats. They went from having 41 seats in the Senate to having 47, so it was a win for them, but they didn't necessarily do insanely well. In North Dakota, they flipped that seat. Hoven, I think that was not Dashiell's seat. It was Brian Dorgan, right? They flipped North Dakota, which was easy for them because Dorgan was retiring. It was a red state. Wisconsin, Feingold did not run for re-election here. He ran for re-election and he lost. And he was the incumbent in 2004. He'd won. But Ron Johnson unseated Feingold in 2010. In Illinois, Mark Kirk, famously, he ended up narrowly beating I don't know how to pronounce his name. Alexei Ianolias. I'll just say Jan Elias because it's like Giannis. Jan Elias. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But Kirk ended up beating Jan Elias in Illinois, which was a bit of an upset. I think in the polls he was pretty close. Wasn't expected to win. Indiana, that was another race. Evan Bayh, he retired, and Dan Coates flipped that seat. Arkansas was a flip. Arkansas actually had 2 Democrats in the Senate at that time, but in 2010, John Boozman beat Blanche Lincoln. Lincoln had been a fairly well-known member of the Democratic caucus, and she ended up losing. And then Mark Pryor lost 4 years after. Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey, the famous Tea Party Republican, he ended up beating Joe Sestak in that race. And, the coalitions here are interesting to see because Sestak did not win Chester or Bucks County, but he still got 49% of the vote because he did so well in the Scranton, Lackawanna area. He also won Luzerne County. He did very well in Pittsburgh and Pittsburgh and Erie. And so, the GOP flipped these Senate seats, and they also it wasn't a flip, but, Maggie Hassan won her Senate race by, over 20 points in New Hampshire, she won in Grafton County, which is, a very Democratic county. So, the Senate elections, the Democrats held enough seats to maintain control of the chamber. Also because, and they did well in 2 races, actually, which I should point out. In Nevada, Harry Reid was actually down in the polling, and he actually beat Sharon Angle. And he was supposed to lose that race. He people thought that he'd lose the seat as Senate Majority Leader, but Sharon Angle actually she lost to Harry Reid, much to the surprise of many pollsters. And then in West Virginia, Joe Manchin, he won the seat for the Democrats. He beat John Race, and he did very well in West Virginia, obviously. So, I think that is it for the Senate elections, but the point is, the Republicans did well. They didn't take control of the chamber because they did so poorly in 2008, but they did very well, and they flipped those seats. Now, in the House in this year, we saw Republicans making gains everywhere. It's actually ironic. There was one seat that the Democrats actually I mean, technically 2 seats. They gained the Hawaii 1st District, and then they also gained in Delaware, Lisa Blunt, Rochester. But they lost their seats. They had a few like random seats that they were going to lose. Like they held seats in like the Dakotas in Idaho, and those were like blue dogs that won 2008 for really weird reasons. And they all got annihilated in 2010, except for the Democrat in South Dakota. I'm forgetting their name, but Kristi Noem, who's now the governor, she won that seat. The Republicans split those seats in Colorado. They won back the 2nd District of New Mexico. They won the East, basically the O'Halloran District in Arizona. They flipped back a suburban seat. They won the Fidget Spinner District in Nevada. They won the suburban, the outer Portland seat in southern Washington. They flipped back a lot of seats in the Rust Belt because the Democrats held some rural seats in northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, and the Iron Range because they were doing really well in 2008, and then they kind of bucked the trend and they stopped. The Republicans also flipped back the seat in suburban Kansas, in Missouri. The Democrats also held 3 seats in Arkansas for some reason, and then they lost them. The Republicans flipped back those seats in Mississippi, southern Louisiana, Alabama, Panhandle, Florida, which is still crazy to think that the Republicans held a seat in the Florida Panhandle, or the Democrats held a seat in the Florida Panhandle to begin with, but they flipped that seat. They also had a bunch of random seats in like rural Appalachia, like in Ohio, West Virginia, and some parts of southern Virginia. And then the GOP also flipped back a ton of seats in the kind of Binghamton corridor region in southern New York and northern Pennsylvania. They also flipped back the Erie district, and they flipped back the seat in, which is now Andy Harris's seat in eastern Maryland, and they also won 2 New Hampshire seats. And so this is all to say the GOP gained like a 50 or 60 seats, and the Democrats gained 2, and so that netted out to be a gain of 63. Yes, the GOP flipped 65 seats, the Democrats flipped 2, and that was a gain of 63 for a net gain of 63 for the GOP. And so, just take a look at the polling data prior to this election. You can see it was clear that the Republicans were headed for a big win. In this day, I guess you could say. They were up by 9.4 in the RSP average. The Democrats actually did better than they were expected. It didn't mean much because they still got, murdered across the country. But they did about 2.6% better nationwide than expected, which, again, it still was not a good election for them by any means, but, they reduced the damage by a little bit. And so the polling here is it shows a consensus that the GOP was going to flip back the House and going to gain in the Senate, and that they were, favored nationwide by somewhere in the, mid to high single figures and, maybe low teens. The final poll from Gallup had them up by 15, but they won by 7, and, the average had them up by 9.4, they won by 7. And so, the one thing that I wanted to sample, or that I wanted to just look at here, and this is just one collection of polling data, but when we look at these 2 polls here, which is Gallup lower turnout and higher turnout, the GOP lead reduced by 5% in the exact same poll when they assumed higher turnouts. So turnout was what mattered in 2010. Like, the Democrats still actually did okay. Like, this will sound crazy, but the Democrats actually still did okay with a lot of voting blocks in 2010. They won the House by 3% in Biden won the popular vote by 4% in 2020. And the Democrats lost the House by 7% in 2010. So that's an 11% swing to the left from 2020 compared to 2010. Democrats still did better with white voters, rural voters, non-college educated voters in 2010 than 2020. So there were still, groups of voters where Democrats did better in 2010 than they did in 2020. It's just, outweighed by the areas that they did worse. And so, just to look at what happened in the polling data, when we saw higher turnout, the GOP were still always going to flip back the House and gain in the Senate. When you see higher turnout, though, it gets a little better for Democrats. So, in 2022 is an election with high turnout, especially from voters of color. Democrats will be okay. They're probably not gonna hold the Senate. They're probably not gonna, hold on to the House. But if turnout is higher, they're going to gain more seats, or they're going to have more seats, I guess I should say. And so, I guess just to bring it all together to kind of corroborate the idea that I'm, I guess, trying to say here, the Democrats were supposed to do worse than they did in 2010. They did not do well, but it could have been a lot worse for them. Now, in 2022, it's different because we still have a bunch of undecided voters. This is the 2022 data, by the way. we still have a ton of undecided voters. Like, the GOP is leading this set by like 5%. Okay, or not by 5%. Sorry, with 45%. I meant just the 5 got mixed up. The GOP is leading with 45% of the vote, and like that says a lot about how much the polls are leaving out or like putting out of the picture. And so we can't make a ton of assumptions about the data we're getting here. Like, we can say that the Republicans are in a better spot than the Democrats right now, and I think that, you can prove that point without using polling, because one of my many rules that I have when I'm talking about politics is I would never use polls to be the center of my argument. I can use them to back it up. I can say, well, they're up by 8 in the latest Newsweek poll or whatever. But I would never want polling data to be at the forefront of my argument, because that would result in a fundamentally flawed argument based on data that's likely not going to be accurate. Like, if the GOP win the House back with exactly 44.8% of the vote, I will be very stunned. Like, it will likely be the weirdest midterm election ever, and there have been a lot of weird midterm elections. Now, whoops, I dropped my pen. Now, to, I guess, address where I think the polling's at, like, I think the Republicans are likely going to win the popular vote nationwide. I guess we're looking at, it's probably going to be in the ballpark of 4 or 5%, maybe 6 if things get really bad for Democrats. On the other hand, the Democrats could gain before November. I'll be honest, I do not think they will. So if you're a Democrat, do not count on it. If they gain, they could get it back to maybe an R+1, R+2 environment, which would be, I think, a win for them, or for the Democrats, I guess I should say. But the point here is that the Democrats are not going to be winning the House popular vote. Like, they're just not. It's extremely unlikely. Like, we've seen polling data that has them doing it, but the aggregate in 538 has them down by 2.2%. And the fundamentals right now are atrocious for Democrats. Biden's negative 11 in terms of net approval. The Republicans are more popular than the Democrats right now for the first time in, since 2001 or something. And so the notion across America is that the Democrats are going to get a major loss in 2022. Now, just look at the polling here. And by the way, I don't like polling. I'm looking at it because I just want to compare it to 2010. But just to see the latest generic ballot poll, Ipsos had the Democrats up by 8 yesterday, which I saw that on Twitter and I was like, wait, what? Because this result would be like 2018, and I can guarantee you that 2018 is not going to be in 2022. It's like that I would be genuinely shocked, and I'd probably quit forecasting politics if the Democrats won the popular vote in the House by 8%, because that would mean that 2022 would be a blue wave midterm under a Biden presidency, which would be stunning. And so, the Democrats were up 8 in this poll, and I was like the first thought that came to my head was, why would they release this poll? Because this result is so indefensible that I would not, if I was working for Ipsos or whatever, I would say we should not release this poll, because the Democrats are probably going to lose the popular vote in 2022, and people can come back to this poll and call us out for it. I don't even know why they put out this poll, to be honest, but they did. So I guess good for them for being honest about it. And so we've seen some other polling. The Democrats are up by 5 in this YouGov poll, which, again, not likely. These polls are a bit more likely. On Message, I've never heard of that, but Morning Consult, Quinnipiac are, both okay pollsters. They had the GOP up by 2 and 3. And then we saw this poll from Trafalgar, which is just as ridiculous as this poll, by the way. That had the GOP up by 13. Susquehanna is actually pretty good. I like Susquehanna. I think they're an underrated pollster. They had the GOP up by 6. CNN had the GOP up by 1. YouGov had the Democrats up by 4. Morning Consult had the Democrats up by 1. And then Signal had the Republicans up by 2. And so, this all comes together, and you can say that the aggregate right now is favoring Republicans. They're kind of in the lead like they've never been before. They're up by 2.2% nationwide. They're probably going to win by more. But what we're seeing right now is this is weird, because I think that we all kind of agree that the Republicans are likely going to win back Congress in 2022, and that Biden's not going to be able to do much in the latter 2 years of his presidency. But Sorry, I should turn on my phone off. I generally have it turned off, but I forgot to. The Democrats are only down by 2 in the polls, when in 2010 they were down by 9 and lost by 7. So yeah, they lost by 7, which if they lose by 7 in 2022, it's going to be a catastrophe for them, and heads are going to roll. But in 2010 they were down by 9, and this year we're kind of have the same energy where it's like, okay, this is going to be a red wave midterm in all likelihood, and they're only down by 2. With a lot of polls showing them up by 8, this poll they have no data, but this poll had them up by 1 when you adjust it, and so the thing with this is that you're 2022 feels like 2010, but the numbers we have are saying it's closer to 2016. So if you're gonna get if you're gonna make me give you a ballpark, I don't think 2022 is gonna be either 2010 or 2016. I think it's gonna be somewhere in the middle. The Democrats are probably going to lose the generic ballot by 4, maybe 5%. But the polling data we see here does not reflect that. But I would be willing to go against it because the polling we've gotten is so atrocious in the past few years. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next one.